Okay, good morning, everyone. Hello, thank you for joining us for today's CAS webinar on engaging all stakeholders in a sustainable and systemic approach to equity and inclusion efforts, presented by a panel of central office and building level administrators and students from the Farmington Public Schools. I'm Bill Silva, Associate Executive Director at the Connecticut Association of Schools, and I'm thrilled to be reunited with my former colleagues and students from Farmington for this timely presentation and to learn more about the district's multifaceted equity framework and the ways in which it is embedded in school climate and culture, community engagement, curriculum practices. Before I introduce Farmington Public Schools Assistant Superintendent Kim Nguyen, I want to thank our corporate partners, Buffalo Wild Wings, the Connecticut Army National Guard, the Connecticut Department of Public Health, Connecticut Lighting Centers, Horace Mann, Jostens, Liberty Bank, and Pullman and Cumley for their ongoing support of CAS's high-quality professional development for school leaders in Connecticut. I also want to go over how we will proceed this morning. During the presentation, you in the audience are muted, but you may share questions you have using the Q&A feature. And our presenters will answer as many questions as there is time for at the conclusion of the presentation. We are also recording the webinar and we'll make the recording available to all who have registered in the next few days. And now let me introduce our first presenter. Kim Nguyen is the Assistant Superintendent for the Farmington Public Schools. She leads the district's Community Council for Equity and Inclusion and works collaboratively with all stakeholders to build equity-focused systems for accountability and capacity building. Assistant Superintendent Nguyen has also served as the Director of Curriculum, District Literacy Coordinator, and as a middle and elementary school teacher, all in Farmington. Ms. Nguyen holds a master's degree in education from Harvard University and a bachelor's degree from Vassar College. Welcome, Kim. We're so pleased to have you and your colleagues, all good friends, and it's wonderful to see you and to have you here today. And we're looking forward to the information you have to share. So now I turn the presentation over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Bill. It's wonderful to see you and to be here with colleagues from across the state. I must say it's challenging to present in this way because you can't connect with people, but we'll do the best we can, and we really appreciate everyone joining us today. We're happy to share our approach to equity work. I know it's something that every district is thinking about now, and the more we can collaborate and share, the more impact we'll have on behalf of our students. So I'd just like to say that our title today was intentional because we do take a systems approach, meaning that we don't see equity as a separate initiative. It's not something different or new that we're doing all of a sudden. Equity is really a way of seeing and rethinking everything that we do. I think we all acknowledge that racism is systemic and institutionalized, and therefore it's our responsibility to really look at the entire system. On the next slide, I'm going to have everyone who's with me today take a moment to introduce themselves in the order that they see on the slide, just to make it clear who should go next. So I'll stop talking and let everyone just say a quick hello.
Great. Good morning. My name is Veronica Ruzek, and I'm the Director of Curriculum and Instruction in Farmington. My work intersects with all this work in many ways that you'll hear about during the whole presentation.
Good morning, Lisette Cobb. I'm the new Equity and Inclusion Coordinator at Farmington Public Schools.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Russ Christ. I'm in my second year as one of the assistant principals here at Farmington High School and spent 18 years here as an English teacher and the last couple of years of that tenure as the student activities director. You may hear the band practicing outside my window right now. So hopefully they'll finish up by the time I jump back on, or else I'll have a soundtrack.
Good morning, I'm Nilda Irizarry. I am the principal at Irving A. Robbins Middle School. I'm really excited to be here today and show you how our equity work expands K-12.
Hi, I'm Danny Cloud. I'm a senior here at FHS, and I'm also the president of the Black Student Union and on the Social Justice Council that we formed in the past year.
Hello everyone, my name is Ayaan Mohammed. I'm also a senior here at Farmington High School. I'm the president of Muslim Student Union, and I'm the representative for Muslim Student Union on the Social Justice Council.
All right, so we're all here and excited to share some of our work with you. Just by way of context on this next slide, the demographic data in Farmington has been shifting. We are a founding district of the Open Choice program. We have 7 schools. As you can see, we are a pretty typical suburban district, but in many ways, we're seeing a shift in our population. And so we do feel an urgency to really address equity and inclusion efforts on behalf of the students in front of us and the families who join with us every day. I'm sure if I were to put up data here, well, you see data here relative to our teaching faculty, and this is something that we're also, I think, across the state struggling with. We know we'd like to have a more diverse faculty in front of our students every day, and it's a challenge that we're trying to work on intentionally. So on the next few slides, I will give you a little background and a little context, and then we'll go into some of the more detailed and specific strategies and action steps we've been taking. But from the central office and administration point of view, we really need to be bold and explicit about how equity aligns with our foundational beliefs and core improvement strategies. This slide shows that Farmington has had a set of core beliefs for since 2010, and in 2018 we added the core belief equity matters. This was communicated widely on our website and through newsletters and at faculty meetings, and really it began the process of establishing a shared commitment to equity goals. Next slide shows that we now have a vision of the global citizen. In 2010, yes, we established a vision of the graduate. So like many Connecticut districts who have profiles of the graduate or vision of the learners, we too had worked with a vision of the graduate that framed and really led all of our systemic work across the district. And last year, we realized that it was time to do a little refresh and think again about whether our vision of the graduate needed some updating in light of everything that we were reading about where our students were headed into a bright future. So Veronica will say a lot more about the vision of the global citizen here in detail, but it just became clear to us through this process that there were some big ideas missing in our vision of the graduate. And we decided that we needed, as a part of this refresh, to really think about a more globally interdependent society and workplace. And so you'll hear from Veronica how the ideas of emotional intelligence, diversity and working with diverse groups of people, civic engagement, and empathy became more prominent in what we're now calling our vision of the global citizen. So I think in light of today's presentation, it's just important to think about how when you look at your district's main goals and the way you communicate what your priorities are, that people can see clearly how equity work and equity beliefs are represented in those big ideas, and that it doesn't appear like a standalone effort or something separate from the core improvement work of the district. This next slide is, I share it with you just to, again, put in context the idea that we see this work of transformation as long-term and very much like adaptive shifts in thinking and practice. And on the slide, you can see that for many years, we repeatedly put this slide up in front of faculty and staff and families and all stakeholders to represent the major shifts that we've been working on over the last decade. It really does help us to demonstrate that it's innovative work, it's iterative work, it happens over time, and we don't have like the next new thing each year. We work on new things. Underneath each of, or within each of these boxes are many specific strategies, but we want to always put them in context of a longer term shift in thinking, shift in practice. So, you know, we worked on mastery-based learning for a few years, and that became one of the strategies within the box of assessment, and shifting from a more teacher-directed assessment of learning to a more student-engaged assessment way of thinking over time. So that's just an example. And I have to say that right now, to share, you know, as well, the challenges that we're facing and the work that we're struggling with, we need to represent equity on this slide. And we're challenged in that we don't want equity to look like a new box. You know, it's not a fifth box. It's really a part of all of these shifts. But if you know, we were to share this again with someone new to the district, which we often do with new teachers, it's hard to see the evidence of equity on this slide. So again, it kind of speaks to the systems approach. However you are communicating about your work and the systems within your work, you need to kind of take another look at those communications and say, you know, how can people see the equity focus in this work? And so as an administrative team, we're thinking specifically about this graphic and how equity would be seen. You know, one of our principals said, maybe it's a colored overlay, like it, you know, it's just something that cuts across everything, but it's a challenge for us. And I just thought, you know, I'd share that with you as well. Now on the next slide, I don't expect you to read this slide, but in keeping with the idea of change and deep learning over time, we needed to show that our equity work was not a brand new thing this year. I know that the urgency has increased, that national events have really caused us all to take bolder and more explicit steps in our work, but we wanted to show that, you know, we've been thinking and learning and reading about equity over time. We've participated in Center for School Change Institutes. And I would say that many districts, I mean, we've been in the room, in the company of many Connecticut districts. And so really, when we think about a systems approach, we're building on the work and the learning that we've done in the past. And I think that we wanted to represent something that showed that, so that the community could see that this is thinking that's been a part of our focus for a few years anyway. But we have to acknowledge that even though as administrators or faculty members, we've been participating in this work, we haven't been transparent enough. We haven't done enough with communication, and really not enough of a clear structure for how all of this deep learning was impacting our daily, weekly, yearly routines and practices. It reminds me of an article that I would highly recommend to everyone by Jal Almeida. I think his the title of the article is something like "Too Much Talk, Too Little Action." And so I think this slide is related to that idea of, clearly there's been a lot of talk, and that's important. We need everyone to be, raising their own level of awareness, better understanding their own biases, their own perceptions, but it can't stop there. It needs to translate into action. So we now have a dedicated page on our website. So certainly I invite you to go to that under our district. I think it's district information, and then it's equity and inclusion, but we have a dedicated page where we're trying to be more explicit and transparent about exactly what we're doing, so that families feel like there's a way for them to be involved, there's a way for them to be informed. And Lizette is going to share a little more about that in a few minutes. The next slide is really speaking about culture. Certainly, culture is everything in a school district. And this slide comes from a presentation that I do during recruitment fairs. So it's sort of like a recruiting slide. What's great? Why do we want you to come and work in Farmington? But it really speaks to who we are as a learning organization. And I think we can't say enough this concept of we are all learners, teaming is the way we do business. We have to keep reinforcing those big ideas so that when we come to a place of conflict or confusion or concern, it's sort of like the leader's job to come back to, well, who are we? When we have tough times, who are we? Well, we're a district that is open-minded, and teaming is our culture. So we can figure this out. And I think when we're asking people to engage in vulnerable conversations and really, think reflectively about their own practices, we need to lean on and be sure that we've established a culture of trust and collaborative processes, collaborative work, so that when another book I would recommend is Unconscious Bias. And one of the chapters in Unconscious Bias is called Cultivating a Brave Community. So when we're asking people to engage in race-based conversations or thinking about the ways in which we select and sort students and what do we need to rethink in that process, we have to be saying things like, this is hard, but we can do this. Our kids need us to do this. And I know we can do it. We have the capacity, we have the mindset, we have the shared commitment. So I think attending to culture is very important. So I'm about to just kind of transition to the rest of the team here, where we will use the rest of the presentation to talk specifically about our equity framework. And the framework has 6 components to it, which represent 6 systems that we decided we would think more deeply about. And within each of the 6 systems, we have 2020, 2021 priorities listed, priority actions. So we thought we'd pause here for a moment. And on the next slide, we'd like you to think about your own district. And if you took, and maybe you are thinking in terms of a systemic approach to equity work, what are some of those systems that you think really are implicated in this work? So if, for example, you think of professional development or professional learning as a system in your district, that would be a good example. So what are some of those other systemic components of continuous improvement work that you think about that would need to be attended to and have really explicit strategies around in order to take a systemic approach to equity work. So we're going to use a little program called Answer Garden, and we're going to ask that you type in a system that you think I might be talking about or you would want to talk about in your school system.
And you'll find the link to it in the chat. Yep. And Charlotte, at this point, you can pull up that tab with the Answer Garden and we can see what people have there. And if you refresh it now, you'll see the answers that people have already said. So refresh from the top. There you go.
So certainly an assessment system. When we think about equity work, we want to think in terms of assessment and the way in which students are, a part of assessment, understand their own progress, understand where they are in terms of expectations, and then sort of the broader idea of assessment in terms of who's in our advanced classes, who is making it through the math pathways and who isn't. So things that really relate to data and assessment. Curriculum, of course, our discipline practices, absolutely. Some people mention multicultural teaming and thinking about a more multicultural approach, policies, human resources and hiring and onboarding and inducting new teachers. So these are all good examples of exactly how we are thinking about everything that's implicated in our equity work. So Charlotte, you can go to the framework that we're using in Farmington to frame our work. And of course, there's no right or wrong. This is just what is working for us right now. And I would anticipate that over time, perhaps, some of the boxes here might look a little different than they do now. But for the remainder of our presentation, we're going to walk through this equity framework. Each component represents a part of the system that we are addressing. And as I said, there are specific goals in each area. As you can imagine, academic achievement is about closing gaps, achievement gaps, opportunity gaps. Curriculum, culture and climate is really about creating safe and supportive communities where all students feel valued and included. SEL is how we're helping students to manage and regulate emotions and helping teachers better understand that really all learning has an emotional base, and we need to be more attuned to that in planning lessons and developing relationships with students. We'll talk about recruitment and hiring efforts, and then revisions to curriculum, teaching and learning, and what that work is looking like this year. And finally, how we are engaging the entire community, our families, and actually the entire Farmington community at large in social justice and equity efforts. It feels like a lot. Yes, I want to acknowledge that it's a lot. And we're doing this while we're also dealing with a global pandemic. And so I know we're all really feeling very overwhelmed. And yet, for us in Farmington, it did not feel like we could just wait, that we couldn't just simply say, well, we're too busy with COVID right now to attend to anything related to equity. And so, as I said, we have some priorities. There's a lot to do. And again, we will think of this work as shifts over a long period of time. And we also don't feel like at central office, we own all this work. This is shared work. It's something that maybe starts with conversations and structures at the central office and administrative level, but it's work that our teachers, our family engagement support specialists in the schools, our curriculum leaders, everyone is implicated and everyone shares in these goals. And so, you know, when you spread the work and you share the work and distribute the work and you make the work meaningful and engaging and important, and something that people believe in, then I think you get, you know, an excitement from all stakeholders and more energy and commitment to the work. So I'm terribly excited to have you meet our students and hear them talk about how they are leaders of this work as well, and how they partner with their fellow students, but as well the faculty and administration in leading this work with us. And we're thrilled to have them here, and we're going to let them sort of close out the session with very inspirational ideas. So now I'm just going to turn it over to Veronica, who will start just talking a little bit more about our vision of the global citizen.
Great, thanks. Charlotte, if you could now put in another, so we're going to try a Jamboard. This is, as Kim mentioned, sort of difficult to you know, try to do some interactive. It's a long session, so we wanted it to be a little bit interactive. And so she's sharing on the slide a Jamboard, but she also shared the link. So if you can go to the Jamboard and be on the first link as I'm talking, so you're kind of seeing the same slide that's on the slideshow anyway. And I'll be able to talk. And what I want you to do is really think about what Kim was talking about before. So what's that connection between what we're doing and our core documents to equity? So that's what I want you thinking about as I'm talking, because when we designed our you know, VOGC, it really was with equity in mind. So it's already in there. And I like how Kim said before that it's sort of like an overlay over everything we do, not a new category, not a new bucket, but in everything. And so as I'm talking or as I conclude the slide, if you could just hit the little button there, that is the sticky note. And some people can add, and so Charlotte was just showing you how to do that. And she said hi there, but if you could add a sticky note and, you know, push yourself, there's 5 slides, so pace yourself. But if you could add maybe 2 slides throughout the time I'm talking, don't feel a need unless you really want to, you can comment on every slide, but at least twice, if you could just comment on there so that we could sort of build some ideas off of each other as well as I'm going through these. And it's far better than just listening to me talk, I hope. So we did have, as Kim said, for 10 years, we had our vision of the graduate. And by noticing that there were pieces that really needed updating and some attention. And so we engaged the entire community in a process to say, like, that served us well for 10 years now. But you know, there are some pieces that need some upgrades, and I would say that if you're looking at the slide there, the 2 places that really got a bump were the first one and the last one. The other ones, as you can see, are very much about you know, the cognitive and the social aspects of learning. But by talking about that first one, by adding that first one, the self-aware individual, we were really trying to emphasize the idea of the intra and the emotional base of learning. And then the civic-minded contributor is exactly what Kim was just talking about as well, about feeling like you're, you know, contributing to something meaningful and larger than yourself. So it's sort of like that twin idea of concentrating on yourself, understanding who you are, but then really, how do you fit into a bigger picture and then contribute to a greater good and a greater whole. So in general, that's what I would say are the updates. And now I'll go through each one of them a little bit more carefully. So the first one, self-aware individual, and I did already say a little bit about this, but this is that emotional intelligence, emotional base. As you're looking at this one, you could be thinking about many of the efforts I'm sure you have in your own district around SEL. And I would say, and you'll hear some of the actual strategies that we use then throughout the presentation, but things like ruler or a mood meter, students understanding themselves, making their own choices because they understand themselves, and having that whole idea too, that they're included, everyone feels valued, everyone has an identity, but in everyone's identity, we have great diversity, and diversity is a great thing, and you're part of everybody's identity is important to the overall, the overall whole of our schools. And so this was like a really important addition now to our VOG C. One additional word I want to say about just the title of it, we went from vision of the graduate to vision of the global citizen. And one of the reasons was because we wanted to, it's not something you're like, it is something you're becoming, but there's not like a destination. And it's not only for when you're a graduate. We really wanted to emphasize you're a global citizen if you're in kindergarten, you're a global citizen if you're an adult, you're a global citizen at all times in all stages. So those are the kinds of, ideas here. And you'll notice that all of our VOGC, I would say domains, so self-aware and think you're born with them, but they're dispositions that we're hoping that students develop over time in our district, because we attend to making sure that experiences that allow students to be self-aware individuals that are integrated into our curriculum and into our activities over time help really impacting equity. So that can make that connection between how is equity sort of the overlay on this self-aware individual. So I'll give you just a minute. So I've been made aware my audio is cutting out. All right, well now it looks like I'm Kim Nguyen. I need to make this a little taller now. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes, we can,
Okay.
we can hear you. Your video's frozen, but we can hear you.
Okay, so we'll continue. Really what I was hoping was, as Kim was talking and saying, and I just want to emphasize the point here that equity is not a separate thing that we do. We're always working on the VOGC, but equity is an overlay on every part of our VOGC. And so really what I wanted people to comment on here is how do you see this, the self-aware individual, what's the intersection there then with equity work? How does working on the self-aware individual help us in our effort of equity? And so I had said a lot of words about self-aware individual, not sure how many of those you caught. But why don't we move on to the next slide? So I was saying how this is a very important part of our framework. But we'll move on to empowered learner. An empowered learner, again, another part of our VOGC. Here, what we're really talking about is students who are in the driver's seat of their own learning. And so here, we're really talking about students who can self-assess their work. They set goals, they self-assess, they can reflect. And this has really changed how we think about assessment in Farmington. And that was a big key word that came out of our answer garden. People said assessment systems, and absolutely, an empowered learner requires that we're really talking about assessment, letting students try things many times over. You don't know something because you knew it the first time. You learn it over time and you keep practicing and getting better. And students being very, really understanding their role in that. And like I said, being in the driver's seat. So no one and done assessments, much more flexible, a lot of choice, a lot of UDL strategies to make sure that all students can reach that goal. And I'm going to give up on my Jamboard idea just because it seems a little more difficult than it needs to be. So we'll move on to the next slide, which is a disciplined thinker. So here again, I'm going to keep saying it. With every slide, I'm just going to say, we're not working on equity as a side thing. We're working on it in the context of a disciplined thinker. Every student needs to have rigorous tasks that they're thinking about. And so I think that some of you who are, reading current research and thinking about, this year and how we move into next year, there's so much talk about acceleration. And a lot of that talk is about, not so much concentrating on what students don't have, but what they do have in terms of, what they've gained over the last year and a half, and and really thinking about this idea of acceleration, the difficult, the rigorous, the tasks that really require you to think, putting those in front of students. Rather than treating students like they're in a deficit model. So again, this idea of creative, flexible, reasoning with evidence, all of that is part of our framework. So on the next slide, engage collaborators, saying it again, it's not separate from equity. Within this, we're also thinking about equity. Everybody's voice is important. And the important part about this is a social construction of knowledge. And the more voices that you have in a classroom, the more diverse voices you have in a classroom, the more everyone feels engaged and feeling like they should contribute, and that they're invited to contribute, and that they're part of the community. The wealth of ideas come out, and everybody gains from all the ideas that come out in the classroom. So we really concentrate on this in our framework and try to develop tasks and activities that get students that have to talk and have to engage with each other. And that's how you become an engaged collaborator. You become an engaged collaborator by collaborating with others. And that's for everyone. So that welcome, inclusive culture where everyone's voice is not only encouraged, but necessary. It's necessary to the learning process that everyone contributes and shares ideas. And then lastly, another area that I thought that we really emphasized in the new VOGC that's really important to this work, and again, connected to equity, is the idea of a civic-minded contributor. So this is what I talked about before. Everyone has to feel like they're contributing to a greater whole, betterment of the community. And this is where you're talking about students really engaging in meaningful, engaging tasks that make a real difference in the world, whether they're in kindergarten and doing some sort of study in kindergarten on trees, or they're already at a high school level and able to contribute in ways that some of our students will talk about later in the presentation. So again, it's an overlay on everything you do, not a separate, it's not a separate initiative that we are trying to do. It's embedded in all of our parts of our system. And then we have a systems approach to thinking about, how in each system do you now have strategies? And I think that now we're going to move on to each part of our, the framework, so that you can see now what the strategies are in each part of our equity framework. So thank you, and I'm turning it over to somebody, but I'm not sure.
Nailed it, me. Thank you. Thank you. I have the first prong with social emotional learning work. Simply put, emotions matter. Emotions can make a deep impact on building and sustaining relationships between all members of our school community. On the next slide, we have some of our major buckets of our SEL work. So the first one is Farmington Public Schools K-12. Teachers and staff have been ruler trained. And for those of you who don't know, it's a Yale program designed to support individuals in identifying and recognizing and managing emotions. How does this tie to our equity work? Based on research, Black and Brown students are often misinterpreted or misidentified as having angry emotions. And this impacts the way that teachers and staff treat those individuals in and out of the classroom. By encouraging all teachers and staff to become emotion scientists, instead of assuming what kids are feeling, we believe that students are going to be more equitably treated. SEL without an equity lens does not accomplish the true purpose of the work. Even our new teachers are provided with the same training so that they do not assume what students are feeling, but they take on this emotion scientist approach and ask and think about what may be impacting a student's interactions or their learning inside of the classroom. We encourage all teachers and staff to check in with students throughout the class period, throughout the school day. One of the systemic pieces to support that work is we often include that in our morning meetings or our advisory time, but we know that checking in with students' emotions can't simply be relegated to morning meetings and advisory times. They must be done throughout the instructional class period as well. Another systemic approach that we have is we often create think tanks as a learning organization where we read current research on social emotional learning and then push the school improvement work within the district. We gathered a social emotional committee that conducted a report, and this report was compiled by stakeholders representative of across the district. We looked at our systemic practices and determined what was working and what recommendations we had to our school systems so that we could create social emotional work that were aligned with our school and building goals and that allowed us to have a renewed commitment toward SEL and equity as a whole. Another systemic approach that aligns with our SEL committee report, and it is something that Kim Wynn often says that's aligned with Elmore's work, it's use the group to change the group. So oftentimes we use a core group of teachers that are trained either in ruler, in our restorative practices, or in our recommendations for SEL, and that group then reports back to their building structures to focus on the school improvement work. Just as Veronica mentioned in our VOGC, we want our students to have empowerment and agency, but we also want our teachers to have that same sense of empowerment as well. So they begin to shift the equity work within the school as well. So social emotional learning is the foundation for our equity work so that all are heard and that all have a voice.
Thank you, Nilda. So I'm just going to say briefly a few things that we're doing in the system of recruitment, hiring, and the ways in which we are trying to attract, hire, and develop teachers, administrators, and staff of color. So there on the next slide, you'll see our priorities for this year. We did conduct a systems review of HR practices. And, just one example of something that came of that review was a mandated anti-bias training. So if anyone in the system is going to participate in an interview committee, they need to participate in the anti-bias training that's on our mandated training program. We use Safe Schools to conduct mandated training, and there's a very good anti-bias session there, and we mandate that everyone attend it and talk a little bit about it when the committee gets together. So that was just one thing that resulted from the systems review. We've decided to enter into a partnership with Relay. If you don't know Relay, you can just search it and read more about it, but it's essentially a way to elevate paraprofessionals who are really interested in becoming teachers and helping them to achieve certification while continuing on the job. So we're working on that pipeline so that some of our really highly skilled and wonderful paraprofessionals can enter into the teaching roles. We're part of the Connecticut Diversity Consortia, and we participate in that alliance work, as well as the Greater Hartford Interfaith Action Alliance group with superintendents. These are the kinds of partnerships that really help us to come up with new strategies and learn from each other. We've created a more direct partnership with UConn, explicitly with the goal of diversifying our new hires every year. This year, we created a week-long aspiring teacher open house. We did that internally, where we sent direct invitations to historically Black colleges and universities and Connecticut teacher prep programs to actively recruit just a larger pool in general of teachers, and really it allowed people to register with us. And that way we had their email addresses and we could meet them in these sessions each day and follow up and stay in touch and do some, brief screening interviews with people who attended. And we had some good success this year, and I'm hoping that that'll grow in our years to come. And then we've participated in a lot more recruitment fairs because virtually we don't have to travel far. So we recently, last week, we were in a Maryland teacher preparation program, HBCU recruitment fair. That again, I think we have to realize it's going to take time. We have to create those partnerships with schools beyond just our Connecticut teacher prep program schools, and really make more concerted and intentional efforts beyond what we've tried in the past. So that's just a brief overview of that. And I'm going to turn it back to Veronica to talk about curriculum and teaching and learning in that system.
Great. So in curriculum, teaching and learning, and go ahead to the next slide there. Again, these are the strategies now. So we have the bigger category of curriculum, teaching and learning, and then some of the
And we've lost your audio again, Veronica. Someone can jump in on this slide, maybe?
Okay. I'll go in, Lisette Cobb. Good morning, everyone. So I will be talking about community engagement. And as you see there, really our goal is to develop deeper understanding of biases and beliefs in order to dismantle racism and other forms of oppression and discrimination. And you can go to the next slide. So this, I added this African proverb that really speaks to the work that we're doing here and our belief in community engagement. Especially engaging in our learning. So if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. So I will talk a little bit about some of the strategies that we have in place. So on a district level, we developed the Community Council for Equity and Inclusion, and this is true stakeholder participation. We were intentional of scheduling 4 meetings for the year where we focused in on some, identity mapping, learning more about our students, student voice, and then we asked Kathy Taylor, to facilitate our last 2 meetings where we're really focusing in on the formation of our subcommittees and really focusing in on roles, responsibilities, purpose, and then overall, what are our goals as we move forward in the work. Kathy Taylor also provided our district-wide implicit bias and social cognition training in December, which was great, and we received great feedback, so she is a partner in this work. Moving on to district-wide professional development and learning. Can we hear me? I just heard something. Oh, okay. We really are focusing on providing professional learning opportunities for faculty and staff that really encourage self-reflection on current practices. So we've engaged in shared reading. Kim shared that we read Unconscious Bias in Schools. Here's a little plug. And I will share what I love most about Farmington is that my first day was like, welcome, let's talk about priorities. And by the way, here's the book, please read the first 3 chapters by Thursday for our meeting. So I had homework on my first day, which I thought was fantastic. But again, so we're continuing our internal and external training. External partnerships are really important. We're continuing to cultivate external partnerships that really support our continued learning and provide the necessary consultation that we need in all areas of our framework. This here, what I think is most important, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. So really, really seeking those experts that can really help inform our work. In the school-based level, we've asked all district leadership to form school-based equity leadership teams. And really their role is to collaborate around equity issues, potential equity issues, in order to begin to dismantle the systems that are inequitable in each school, right? And identify proactive ways to really engage our stakeholders about the challenges that arise from inequities. And most importantly, promote an inclusive culture that really engages and draws on the assets of our students, families, and staff. We've heard a lot already about student voice and agency. I will not speak too much about this because you will have the pleasure of meeting two dynamic seniors shortly. But really, what I will say is that we really make an effort to engage students as partners in our school change efforts. And if you want to know how you're doing as a district, if you need a temperature read, ask your students. They will tell you boldly, which is fantastic. In terms of family engagement, we've engaged in various virtual events, PTO meetings with really focused topics, and really exciting, really kicking off our school-based community conversations where we bring in our families to really talk about the work, talk about our framework, give insight on our framework and how that looks in every school and how they can support the work. Thank you, Bill. And lastly, community equity and inclusion webpage. So really, we've been updating it and we'll hope to really launch it officially next year on this academic year. But it's really a place to welcome our families. Kim spoke about being transparent about our work. And so it's really an opportunity to highlight the work that every school district-wide we're doing, and also highlight our diversity and acknowledge our cultural heritages. And so if you would imagine, if you're a parent, when you come to the webpage and you wanted to find books on learning more about the Latinx heritage, you should be able to click on our Padlet and there's some resources there for you. So again, bringing in all our community members in this work and deepening their work. So I will pass it on to, I think it's Nilda.
So in a minute, you'll hear from our FHS seniors that are here to talk a little bit about the school culture and climate work that they are leading at FHS and how they partner with other individuals K-12 and across Connecticut. So creating this inclusive culture of respect is really the foundation. We believe that relationships are the center of equity work, and we know the strength of students' relationships can often dictate their academic, social, emotional, and behavioral performance and success. On this slide, we have various things that we're engaging in, but I do want to offer just a caution that came from Tracy Benson in our reading of Unconscious Bias in Schools. He said equity work is not just about focusing on discipline. We know that the majority of our students do not come into contact with the disciplinary system. So that's why school climate and culture is so important. You need to ask yourselves and people in your district, what kind of school culture and climate are you cultivating and creating for students, faculty, staff, and families? Creating this environment of inclusivity and belonging in all goals and expectations within the systemic structure of the building is very important. Veronica Rusek organized social justice learning modules. Charlotte, you can click on it. Oftentimes we're asked to share our social emotional or our social justice modules with other districts, but it's so specific and tailored to Farmington. We focused on the local history of Farmington and how it was created. How does racism impact community members in Farmington? We shared the history of redlining and white flight with our faculty and staff, so that way they knew where Farmington was rooted, what were some of the practices that worked in the creation of Farmington. We talked about the socioeconomic structures that are within Farmington, which areas were given sort of names, and what reputations based on where you live. So this deep work started within our community, and then we started thinking about how it impacted our schools. So it's so important for each district to think about how local history impacts not only your students, but their families as well. We did anti-bias training for all faculty and staff, and we know that moments of racism and hatred don't only occur in the classroom. Oftentimes they occur in unstructured times where paraprofessionals and even cafeteria staff are often listening in. So moments of inequity can happen during these moments. And how can you equip all members of your faculty and staff to confront incidents of bias and hatred when they see it? So part of our systemic work is empowering all staff to support our equity goals as well. Each building has school-based equity leadership teams that are representative of all stakeholders that really question and push the school improvement work as we go forward. And just as Lisette said, we have focus groups where we sit with students and hear how does the work feel to them? What is their experience? We've taught all students in Farmington to be self-directed learners. Even in our coaching visits or our instructional visits to classroom, we often think about each classroom practice, and we ask teachers questions like, what are systems that you're doing that students could really be leading instead? This self-directed or student-led learning has helped empower students in our districts at all levels. We've started student leadership clubs and activities, K-12, and this expands the equity work to be student-led on all levels. Today, I have the privilege of introducing our assistant principal at the high school, Russ Christ, who's brought students to share how the equity work comes to life at FHS.
Hey, everybody. You can go on to that next slide, please. I'll try to go through my part quick. I'm sure you'd much rather hear from our students. So next, we're going to discuss the purposeful steps that we have taken at Farmington High School and in Farmington Public Schools in general to both engage and empower our students. You can stay on this slide. At Farmington High School and across the district, student engagement and empowerment started with creating a sense of community and belonging for all students. Our school slogan is embedded, and you can see it here, is embedded in everything we do. One school, one community, one us. It permeates our discussions about students and our decision-making processes. In 2015, we had about 40 clubs and activities that students were involved in. At that time, administration made a push. You can stay back on that last slide, I'll tell you when. Thank you. Made a push to open this up to help all students find a sense of belonging, both in and out of the classroom. To date, we have over 75 clubs, all student created and run. In Farmington, we actively seek opportunities to engage and empower students in this work, and this really helps to set the foundation, that sense of belonging. Next slide, please. This decision also coincides with the formation of almost all of our social justice clubs at FHS, including the student unions that you see here, as the Asian American Student Union, Black Student Union, Brave, GSA, Indian Student Union, Jewish Student Union, Latinx Culture Club, Mental Health Awareness, Multicultural Student Union, Muslim Student Union, and the Social Justice Club. These student unions and clubs provide students a safe place for them to meet and share ideas and concerns with students who look like them and who have shared experiences. Clubs, like the social justice ones listed on the slide, are embedded in our culture and have changed the landscape in our school for all students. This work was allowed to happen because our central office leadership made this work important. They have put the trust and support into building administrators into our district. Our administrators were then able to pass this on to faculty and staff, and therefore students. It is a great example of our core beliefs being put into action on a daily basis in our buildings. Next slide, please. Here's an example of the slides that we share with our students and with our and families on open house to advertise just a few of our clubs. This cross section of clubs also makes up part of the Social Justice Council that our students are going to be talking about soon. Next slide, thank you. This year we held our 5th annual Social Justice Week at FHS. Each February for the last 5 years, students have planned and presented important social justice topics to their peers. We kick off the week with a social justice lesson in our advisory period, which leads to students handing in index cards about what social justice means to them. The cards, as you can see on the left here, are displayed all week outside of the library where our presentations occur. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk to you a little about how we do it and how this all started. Social Justice Week really in Farmington High School has its roots in our Social Justice Club, which was founded by 2 students in the spring of 2016, just weeks after a small group of FHS students chanted SAT scores towards fans of Capital Prep High School during a girls' basketball game. This chant sparked some outrage, and rightly so. It also garnered some publicity in local papers. There's a link here, but you can search it if you're interested in learning more about that. And really, and even more importantly, it sparked some conversations between the 2 schools, and it sparked change here at Farmington High School. As 2 FHS students, specifically, were embarrassed by the chants and started the Social Justice Club with the idea that we could do better and that we had to do better. The club advisors took a trip to Southern Connecticut State University in November of the following year, gathering inspiration and ideas for the first annual Social Justice Week that came in February of 2017. Next slide, please. Our principal at this time, and now actually the moderator of this presentation, Dr. Bill Silva, went all in to support our faculty and students in this work. The support allowed those involved in planning and executing Social Justice Week to focus on the work and preparing the presentations. This group started out relatively small, but has grown each year. The clubs and presenters start meeting in September and work for months to prepare an amazing and professional product. This work is only enhanced by the work done K through 12 in our district, where clubs and organizations focused on equity and diversity began as early as elementary school. And that kind of leads into the next slide, which is a quote. If we teach kids about diversity and equality from a very early age, we have the power to transform them into open-minded adults. Let us teach our kids not to be afraid, but rather to respect each other. And that's work that we do each day here. So this is from 2017. You can see, I don't know how well you can see it, but you can see the like from Tuesday and from Friday of that week, how we planned Social Justice Week. There were a total of 20 presentations in 2017. They were made in front of 815 total participants in attendance in the audience. The final presentation of the week, Gender and Sexuality 101, closed down the library with over 100 students, faculty, and staff in attendance. The week, like as it says here, was divided into themes. Each day had a different theme. They were race, human rights, religion and world issues, class and poverty, and gender and sexuality. All week, student art and creative writing was on display in the library. It really created a safe space for students, and since then has really become that. Social Justice Week in 2017 was led by 2 female students, Maggie and Julia, who really did a lot of the planning, organization, and they also presented during the week. Next slide, please. The growth has really been amazing, and you're going to meet a couple students soon who really are a huge part of that and being embedded in our school culture. But this year, in a virtual format, Social Justice Week included 30 presentations. The presentations were viewed by well over 2,000 students, faculty, and staff. The growth and evolution of this event rests squarely on the shoulders of our student leaders, who are supported by a core team of faculty advisors. The 2 seniors you are about to meet have been involved in some capacity since they entered FHS and are now senior leaders of the Social Justice Council. Their focus on intersectionality and growth beyond a week-long event have pushed Social Justice Week to new heights and have set the stage for more growth in the future. Next slide, please. Here are a few images from our pre-COVID presentations. As you can see, this is taking place in our library. All presentations took there during lunch waves. The virtual format has allowed us to open that up a little bit and get a lot more viewers and get into different spaces. But pre-COVID, students could come on their own and classes could also sign up to attend during the week. Next slide, please. And this is an image of our Social Justice Week panel that typically took place at the end of the week, where presenters would share their experience in preparing and their inspiration behind their presentations. Very powerful way to end the week. So both Ayan Mohammed and Danny Cloud, who you will meet shortly, played an active role in planning and executing Social Justice Week 2021. Their leadership has helped to get the message out to new audiences and expand the work beyond the week of presentations, creating Social Justice Day, which happened earlier in the year. They also create social justice themed podcasts throughout the year. And just yesterday, we're a part of an amazing day here was a Social Justice Summit in which they shared their experience and what the work that they do here with schools. And they also learned other things from other schools from in our area, students and advisors from schools in our area virtually visited FHS and shared ideas and learned a little bit more about what we do here. It was an amazing day. I was really excited to have a small role and check that stuff out yesterday. So without further ado, I'm honored to introduce Danny and Ayan. They are here to tell you about their social justice journey in Farmington Public Schools.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ayan, as Mr. Chris said, and I'm very happy to be here, but I'm first gonna begin by talking about our journey in expanding Social Justice Club and social justice at the high school and our work in creating safe spaces at FHS. So 5 years ago, as Mr. Chris said, two girls approached Mr. Loomis and Mr. Chris to start Social Justice Club. These girls were outspoken in Social Justice Week when it comes to presenting in Social Justice Week, or also leading protests on things like gun violence. However, these two girls were white women and knew that they would not receive the backlash that a minoritized student would receive. They understand they had the privilege of being a white woman and being seen as approachable or passionate, and rather their anger is seen as like invalid, and as most people of color would be seen. So these two girls used their platform to amplify the voices of students who were minoritized at the high school. After Social Justice Club was created, it granted the passageway for so many other safe spaces and platforms like Black Student Union to exist. These platforms allowed students to have discussions such as like, why you mad, where students would share times they felt as though they had been racially profiled, called a slur, or faced outright racism and prejudice. It also allowed allies to come to the meetings and learn or share their thoughts. That 1 hour that we had every Friday allowed students to validate each other and feel validated. They felt validated enough to go to teachers and administrators and call for change and consequences. Through creating these safe spaces allowed for this ladder of success that we have now. Many of the students in Black Student Union were not friends with each other or knew each other prior to these meetings. But hearing and understanding that people have underwent similar prejudice created a bond and connection that these students had with each other. After Black Student Union was formed, we had so many social justice clubs such as Muslim Student Union, Jewish Student Union, or the Latinx Club that formed this year to come about. When students see the representation many have, they want to mimic that. And it's important that all students have their own platform. As minoritized communities, we all experience completely different injustices. And while we can all be amazing allies to each other, each group deserves its own space and to express their individual injustices that they may face. They all also need their own individual advisor that they feel completely supported by. Next slide, please. So me and Danny are going to talk about taking action in our community and strengthening our activism. So when these clubs and amazing opportunities were created, we and our advisors knew that we could not just dive headfirst into everything. So we strengthened our activism by going through social justice workshops, planning the Truth About Hate presentation to freshmen. But I specifically want to talk about how we took action in our community. During Social Justice Week presentations years ago, we would present on topics such as white privilege or homophobia. But due to the support we have in administrators, teachers, and overall allies in this community, we had the opportunity to truly expand on these topics and go from, as Mr. Chris said, around 22 presentations to presenting over 30 this year. And during our 30 presentations, we expanded to talk about white fragility and how white people react to being called out, such as crying or jumping to say, "I'm not racist." We also expanded to talk about internalized homophobia, which allowed students to not only learn about homophobia, but also self-reflect as to why they might be homophobic. We also talked about topics such as Black feminism and explained how oftentimes the feminist movement can be used as a tool of white supremacy that only works towards the liberation of white women. Through these presentations, we used it as an opportunity to invite many underclassmen to present and work on the presentations with us. Many of us, except for Ari Sussman on the council, are graduating next year, and we wanted to make sure that this work will go to someone who won't hold back and truly understands the power their voice has. Thank you.
Yeah, like I was saying, we were able to start off our social justice initiative because of Maggie and Julia, but because we started it, we needed to see in what ways we could expand it. It couldn't just be limited to a couple of protests and a couple of presentations. We really needed to see how far we could push the work that we could do surrounding social justice. And a lot of the time we were focusing on singular instances. And what I mean by that is we were focusing on our individual activism and our activism within our singular clubs. And we were making sure that these clubs and these people were able to find their true mission when it came to their activism. And we wanted to give them the tools in order to strengthen a lot of the activism that they do. But slowly, we started to incorporate people outside of our community and just made it something bigger than FHS by doing things like the Truth About Hate presentation, like Aya mentioned, and by doing countless and various social justice workshops for the students that are so passionate about this work. You can go to the next slide. From this point on, we really started to realize that there was a sort of disconnect between the social justice clubs at our school. A lot of them were doing amazing work and they were doing things within their clubs, but we realized that they were only doing it within their clubs and not with other people. We were all fighting and educating and activating, but we were doing it alone by ourselves, and we weren't pulling on the people around us that were fighting the same fight. Besides a handful of couple of joint club meetings, for example, the BSU and the GSA met a couple of times over the years just to talk about trans women of color or certain hate crime instances where the victims were both Black and in the queer community. There was really no collaboration happening within social justice at FHS. In the summer of 2020, Mr. Loomis, our social justice club advisor, he pulled together all of the leadership within the social justice clubs that Mr. Chris mentioned earlier, and he formed our first and official social justice council. During the summer, we met every week. I want to say it was like every Wednesday at like 8 o'clock on a Google Meet, and we would just talk to each other and try to figure out what our common goals are and how we can fight this fight together. As a council, we found that intersectionality should be at the core of everything that we do. And together, we represent so many identities at the same time. And by working so closely together, we realized we needed to start taking our activism outside of ourselves. What I mean by that is we need to stop fighting fights for the identities that we identify with. For example, I don't need to always singularly fight for being a woman or being a Black woman. I definitely need to be an ally to the communities outside of just my identities. And we needed to start fighting harder for those fights, even though we don't identify with the people in those fights. We try to think of the best ways to promote intersectionality, and we started to add new events onto our agenda. For example, we had our first official social justice day this year, and then we had our first official social justice summit yesterday. And slowly we started adding more and more things to our plates. It was a pretty busy year for all of the council. We released a couple of podcasts this year. One was on intersectionality, obviously, and the other one was on the difference between politics and social justice and how to walk that fine line between the two. We would release these podcasts during our connect periods, which are basically like an extended homeroom for everyone to see. And we kind of wanted everyone in our school to understand it and give them this basic knowledge in order to set them up for the information they're going to be finding out during Social Justice Week. It was our goal for this year to uplift and amplify student voices. And these events were our first examples of that. For our social justice day, we did microaggression presentations, and we would have teachers show them throughout their class periods, and anybody was welcome to do it. We promoted them through our clubs, and we promoted them microaggressions that they face as students. They talked about what they look like, what they sound like, and how they made them feel. And it wasn't limited to certain identities. If you faced a microaggression based on an identity, you were welcome and free to share that with us, and we encouraged it. From then on, the council was able to pull off a countless amount of things. Like I said, the podcast, we were able to create our first social justice t-shirt. We were hosting a social justice summit, and we talked to people in high up places like politicians, administrators, and social activists outside of our own community, like Mima Gonzalez and the people from the chef movement. We were also able to do an interview with Johanna Hayes, which was an awesome opportunity for us. And the support that FHS Social Justice has been receiving has just grown over the past school year. Teachers, administrators, and influential people within social justice were all there rooting for us in our fight, and it really pushed us to do more this year. Walking to school and seeing that my teachers were wearing the social justice t-shirts that we created truly inspired me, because it showed me that I was doing something important and that it was valued in my school. It is important to uplift student voices and be with them in every step of the way, because the work that we do sometimes can take a toll on us. And it's hard to really keep up with that, because social justice, it's a beautiful thing because you do get to come together as a community and talk about it, but there are negatives to it. And it does take a toll on students, but we were able to create this community because of all the work that we did that was more cohesive, more collaborative, and more intersectional with the work that we did. This year's social justice week was probably the biggest one we've had so far. We had hour-long presentations running all day. And we had it ranging from talking about the fetishization of women of color to talking about the difference between Zionism and Judaism. So we really tried to cover all the bases. Obviously, we couldn't talk about everything social justice, but we did try our best to do so. But this year, you can truly see that intersectionality piece really come through. And that is because the council really tried to push it. And so this year, and hopefully years to come, that intersectionality piece stays within Farmington, and it's able to thrive and live on at our schools.
All right, thank you both for sharing the work that you do and the experiences that you have had here. It's really been amazing. And so many people from outside have come and said, like, that work usually isn't done until college. That's when you get those experiences. And really, because of our students pushing this work forward, they've been able to have those experiences in high school and have really embedded that in our culture. I also think it's really important that we acknowledge that that this is all connected back to the systems that have been put in place in our district. So you can see here just a reminder of the vision of the global citizen: self-aware individual, empowered learner, disciplined thinker, engaged collaborator, and civic-minded contributor are the categories. And if you go to that next slide, please. We're hoping that we can try like either a flood the chat or a chat bomb, they've been called. So I'm going to give you about 10 seconds or so, 10 to 15 seconds to type. Don't hit enter yet and put it in the chat. We'll flood the chat. So think about what aspects of the FPS vision of the global citizen did you notice our students demonstrating throughout their presentation? So I'm going to give you some time to type it in. Don't hit enter yet. We'll flood the chat all in one shot in about 15 seconds or so. So if you can go back to the previous slide, just so people can see, thank you very much, see the different aspects. And then I'll give the countdown and everyone can hit enter at the same time. You may have seen this in some of your classrooms as well, some teachers using this. So what aspects of the vision of the global citizen did you notice our students? All right, so if you haven't put it in already, we're going to give the countdown here and everyone can throw them into the chat. 3, 2, 1, go. Right. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. We have from all of them to, maybe even more specifically, all 5: empowered learner, even more specific, agency, identity, confidence, a growth mindset, empowered, engaged, self-aware contributor, all of the above, disciplined thinker. So you can see that, and it's all organic. It's work that students have a passion for, they want to do. They've put, looking at Ayan and Danny, hundreds of hours in over the last couple of years. They have not gotten a grade. They have not, it's not about credit for them. It is about them doing things that they're passionate about. And it also fits in with our vision of the global citizen. So thanks again, everybody, for coming. I know we have some more stuff coming up, but just wanted to say thank you, and thanks to our students for taking time out of their day to join us.
Great. I mean, I think we may be out of time, but I had sound issues before, and I was hoping to just say a word or two still about curriculum, because I know that came out as one of the, top categories. But maybe it's serendipity. I never want to go after students, because you can never do better than the students did. But what I want to say is, when, this idea of student voice is real and true. And so it kind of gives me an opportunity to let the students know that one of the sessions that they're talking about was one about the ethnocentricity of our curriculum. And it was a recorded seminar that then I was able to use during one of my curriculum community council meetings and share it with all the teachers that develop curriculum. And it really, that student voice, I got to tell you, is just so powerful, because everyone then could really connect to why this work is so important, why it's important for there to be the windows and mirrors in our curriculum. And so even though we've been working on this work for a while, the student voice really, amplifies and really encourages us to keep going in this direction. So I just wanted the students to know that those presentations not only have an impact on their students that they were presenting to, but to teachers across the district, and encourages us to keep going with the work. And so you can see there, I'm not going to read them all, but those are some of the efforts that are, maybe more recent, but just as a background to say that we've really worked hard on other equity things in the areas of curriculum, teaching and learning, like de-leveling, I would say, and also our grading practices, as I shared before, in terms of the student engaged assessment practices that we've put into our curriculum and our teaching and learning. So I never want to go after the students, but it was a good opportunity to say how their work and their voice really shapes the work of the district in all areas, and particularly in curriculum, teaching and learning.
Thank you, Veronica. So I feel badly that this took more time than we expected it to. We wanted to have some time for questions, so we're happy to stay on and answer any questions that people have. And Bill, you can let us know whether that's even possible, but we just leave you with this sentiment that comes from the inaugural poem that our beautiful and talented poet laureate Amanda Gorman spoke, that really just speaks to this idea that this is a long process, that we're in this together, that we're not perfect, but it's in the work that we do together with true heart and purpose that will change a system, a society, a people. And we couldn't be more proud of our students for engaging in this work with us, our families, our teachers. So, I invite you to use the full quote from the poem. It's just beautiful. It helps people kind of start a conversation, but we'll leave you with that, and I'll send it back to Bill to let us know what we can do next. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kim. And really, I think most of the questions people had were answered along the way. There was one question about, was the anti-bias training done in person, or did you use the Safe Schools modules?
Well, the anti-bias training that, excuse me, that we did was done virtually simultaneously. So Kathy Taylor was our presenter, and all faculty, staff, paraprofessionals, custodians, everyone participated virtually over the course of 2 days. But the anti-bias training that's required of teachers who are going to participate in a hiring committee is done through Safe Schools.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Thank you. I just really want to thank everybody on the panel, Kim, Veronica, Nilda, Lisette, Russ, especially Danny and Ion. We love to hear from students, and you're the reason why we do the work that we do, and just your passion and your commitment and that of all of you in the Farmington Public Schools just came through so loud and clear. So thank you so much. I want to thank our audience today. I want to thank once again, our corporate sponsors for CAS, Buffalo Wild Wings, Connecticut Army National Guard, Connecticut Department of Public Health, Connecticut Lighting Centers, Horace Mann, Jostens, Liberty Bank, and Pullman and Cumley for their support of this type of professional development. I know this information, this work is so important, and I'm confident that everyone listening will find it very valuable for the work that they're doing in their own schools, in their own districts. We have a recording of the webinar that we'll make available. I encourage everyone in the audience to go on our CAS website for information about future webinars and look in our news blast. Again, thank you to our panelists from the Farmington Public Schools. Thank you for the work that you're doing, and appreciate everybody being here with us this morning. So on behalf of CAS, I'll say have a great rest of your day, a good end of the week, and thanks so much. Bye, everybody.